The protests in Turkey continue. The big news the last couple of days is that the Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan has returned to Turkey. He was greeted immediately by a very large crowd of his supporters. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. He's got supporters, so many supporters, that they just happened to be waiting for him. I'm sure it wasn't set up by his government or anything like that. And the news that I want to focus on this update today on the show is some of the statements that have been made both by him, by the people supporting him. I don't like some of the rhetoric that's being put out there, and so we're going to focus on a couple of those quotes. So first, the Prime Minister echoes his statements from last week saying, these protests must end immediately. No one's surprised by that. Of course, as we said last week, he was saying the same thing. Yeah, he wants the protests to end. He's part of the government. The protests are against the government. Nobody's surprised by that. But there are some other statements that he made that I find to be a little bit more, I guess, threatening, or at least worrisome. At one point, he says to his supporters, no power but Allah can stop Turkey's rise. And I think that that's the exact thing you should not say, considering the nature of these protests and how many of the people opposing him, part of the reason they're opposing him is because of what they see as the rising influence of Islam in Turkish government, which, as we said last week, has been historically quite secular. That's one of the appeals of Turkey. So a statement like that, not the best way, I guess, to mend some of the divides between you and the protesters, at least from my point of view. Now, one of the chants of the supporters of Erdogan, one of the things they were saying was, don't test our patience, Istanbul is here. I guess that's not quite as threatening as the religious rhetoric, but the problem there is, look, we've got these major issues in many different areas that are being debated between the government and the protesters, and the idea that the protests are testing the patience of the pro-regime forces, that sounds to me, historically, looking back on other cases like this, like a prelude to violence. We've already had violence. We don't want more violence, and so I don't like it being casually tossed around by regime supporters. Now, one thing that Erdogan did say that is a little bit more positive, I guess, despite the fact that he was talking to his supporters, he did say, some say the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister of 50%. We have always said that we are the servant of the 76 million. More positive, I guess. I mean, he's indicating there that despite the fact that many people, tens of thousands around the country, are protesting his government, he is still their president. That is their prime minister, and so that is obviously a good statement. That's what we want to hear. Now, one of the updates that we want to give to you today is that previously, last week, when we talked about the initial Occupy Gezi protests, there had not been that much violence. There had been some injuries, some clashes with the police, some mass arrests, and things of that sort. But at that point, I don't know if there was any confirmed deaths. Now, there are at least 3 deaths that have been confirmed. But look, it's extremely difficult to get precise numbers on this because obviously the government doesn't want the information getting out there, and it's extremely censored. Now, some people have been tweeting me saying that there's been deaths every single night, and we do know that thousands at this point have been injured, while in other areas there have been mass protests that have been relatively peaceful. So in some areas there are still clashes, in some areas it's more peaceful. That's good to know. But yeah, at this point, the problem really is that information has not been coming out in anything like a steady flow. Like the most recent information I was able to find today, being Saturday, by the way, is 2 days old at this point. And so really to get information, we have to rely on Twitter, we have to rely on statements from people in the country, but no organized flow of information is coming out there. As we said, they're doing all that they can to censor the flow of information. So we will keep you apprised of what's going on in Turkey. We only film once a week, but this is an important story, which is why we're focusing on it multiple weeks in a row. And currently, that's all we know. If you have information from Turkey, feel free to give it to me. I would love to hear more from people who actually know what's going on inside of Turkey.